Winter can be brutal on machines, and EVs are no exception. Cold weather can decimate the range of an EV and bring charging rates to a crawl. Fortunately, there are solutions to both of these problems, and they are preconditioning and heat pumps. Firstly, let's talk about lithium-ion batteries. They have an optimal operating range of about 60 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 to 35 degrees Celsius. Now that varies a bit from battery to battery, but for the most part, that's pretty much where they are working at their prime. How a lithium-ion battery works. Basically, there is a cathode and an anode, and in between those is an electrolyte. As ions move back and forth through the electrolyte from the cathode to the anode or from the anode to the cathode, you're either charging the battery or discharging the battery. Discharging the battery means you're sending energy to the electric motors. When the battery falls below its optimal operating range, that electrolyte actually thickens up. It gets thicker and thicker the colder it gets, a bit like molasses. And so when it's really, really cold outside, it's essentially gumming up the works. Like an internal combustion engine vehicle, an EV has a cooling system, except that on an EV, that cooling system's main job is to maintain an optimal operating temperature for the battery pack. And like an internal combustion engine, an EV works best when the weather is mild. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. When it falls below freezing, the entire system is working overtime to try to get the battery back to optimal operating temperatures. And that same battery that's working to get itself to the correct temperature, it's also working to make sure that the cabin inside your vehicle is also warm, so you don't have to wear a big, huge winter coat when you're driving to work. And the battery's trying to do all that while, well, the chemistry inside of it is sluggish. And yet, regardless of what you've been told, EVs do work in the winter. And for some clear evidence of that, let's talk about Norway, a country in Northern Europe that, well, their new car sales, 91.5% of them are EVs. This is a country that has gone full in on EVs. And in the south, the very southern tip in Oslo, during the winter, the temperatures hover around freezing, but it gets much colder the further north you get. And people are still buying and driving EVs there. To help those EVs in Norway and in colder parts of the United States shrug off the cold, there are two pieces of technology available in most modern EVs. Those are battery preconditioning and heat pumps. Let's start with battery preconditioning. Essentially, the EV is told to get the battery ready for either driving or charging. If someone plugs in their EV every night and they leave it around the same time every morning, they can schedule a departure time. That will tell the EV to have the cabin either warmed up or cooled to your preference, but more importantly, it can precondition the battery so that it's operating at an optimal temperature. That way, when you leave, your car is ready to go, and it does all this by using electricity from the grid and not from your battery pack. This essentially warms the EV's battery to the optimal operating range while also, well, warming up the cabin so it's nice and toasty. Or if you happen to live somewhere very hot, it'll actually cool down the cabin. Either way, your cabin is at the desired temperature and your EV battery is also at the desired temperature, and all of this happens before you even leave the house. If you're on the go, well, the last thing you want is slow charging. And while there are variables within the charging network that you can't control how quickly your vehicle charges if it encounters a charging station that's working at full capacity. And once again, our friend preconditioning comes to save the day. On most modern EVs, you can precondition in one of two ways. Some EVs allow the driver to manually start the preconditioning procedure. The Lucid Air, for example, allows owners to start preconditioning the battery for charging or acceleration runs. Most other vehicles will automatically precondition the vehicle when a charging location is added to the vehicle's navigation. You add the charging station as your destination, or at least along your route in your in-car navigation. That way, the vehicle knows that when it gets to where it's going to be plugged in to a charging station, and On the drive over, it preconditions the battery. The rub is that many of us actually use third-party navigation apps and not the in-car navigation system. We use Apple Maps or Google Maps or some other mapping software. But for the sake of DC fast charging and to charge as quickly as possible by preconditioning your vehicle, use the in-car navigation when you are navigating to a DC fast charging station. It'll tell the car where you're going, and the car will be happy to oblige by getting the battery ready for charging. Now let's talk about something that doesn't require you to do much of anything, and that is the heat pump. Now, you may have heard of heat pumps in regards to home HVAC systems, and you've probably heard that they're incredibly efficient. Well, that same technology, it's in EVs. At their core, heat pumps on an EV are like an air conditioner in reverse. It's a circular system that's filled with refrigerant gas that has an extremely low boiling point. So as the ambient air hits an evaporator, the low pressure gas heats up. The compressor further heats up the gas and increases the pressure. The gas then enters a condenser where it becomes a liquid, and that creates heat. Air is blown across the condenser and into the cabin, and voila, you have a heated cabin. After leaving the condenser, the high pressure liquid is pushed into an expansion valve where it becomes a low pressure, low temperature liquid that then returns to its gaseous form as it once again picks up heat from the outside air, and the whole system starts again. While it may sound complex, it's actually incredibly efficient. The other way to heat a cabin of an EV is via PTC, or a resistive element. Essentially what happens is that energy from the battery is sent through a resistive element, and because whenever energy hits resistance, it creates heat. Now that has a coefficient of 1 because all the energy that is sent to that resistive element is turned into heat, and heat is what we want. It's not waste, like say in an internal combustion engine. Now stick with me on the waste part. I'll explain how important it is in just a moment. Heat pump systems, they have an energy coefficient of 3, and that's because 2/3 of the energy needed to warm up the cabin comes from essentially ambient air and anything else that the system can pull that has heat, while only 1/3 of the power to warm up the cabin comes from the battery. Meanwhile, a PTC with a resistive element, it has a coefficient of 1 because it's pulling from the battery and nowhere else. That's why you'll regularly hear people say that heat pump systems are 300% more efficient than PTC systems. And that is because, again, 2/3 of the energy needed to warm the cabin of, say, this BMW i7 in the dead of winter, it's gonna come from the outside world. Let's get back to waste. EVs are incredibly efficient compared to an internal combustion engine. In fact, most of the energy that an internal combustion engine makes is given off as waste, and that waste is heat. Now, automakers realize that they could use that heat via a heater core and some fans in order to keep the occupants of their vehicles warm. With EVs, it's a different story because EVs don't give off, or are not as wasteful and far more efficient, so they don't just give off a ton of heat. There had to be other ways in order to heat the cabins of vehicles, and that's how you come up with heat pumps and PTCs with resistive elements. To learn more about how heat pumps work and see how they extend the range of vehicles, we're here at Kia's North American headquarters in Irvine, California.
So I'm Alex Pulowski. I do regulatory strategy here at Kia. When we went to EVs starting over 12 years ago, we basically have a vehicle that for the longest time we've had a big engine that takes gasoline and converts 80% of it to wasted heat.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's cold outside, once the car is warmed up, that heat is basically free.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, we never really thought about worrying about having heat during the winter once the car is started.
Mm-hmm.
So now take this big block of heat generation and you take that out, and now you have an EV. You got to think about now, where is the heat going to come from in a cold weather situation?
My name's Steve Kozowski. I work in product planning. Early on, the engineers figured out that they need to reduce the parasitic draw of HVAC.
Mm-hmm.
So a decision was made probably 2012, maybe 2013, to engineer a heat pump system for the first Soul EV. And what happened is they got pretty good at it. They made it a discipline within the company, which is to say that there's a lot of engineers who just focus on that. The competency and so forth, the proficiency within the company really grew and grew and grew. They learned a lot.
The whole aspect of it was batteries are really expensive, even more expensive than today. And so we're fighting this, trying to get range, trying to make the vehicle not cost so much that hopefully people will actually buy it. The biggest thing is how can we get more range out of the car in these cold weather situations? First it was heat pumps. Typical PDC heater, one at best, and you're literally just turning current and turning it straight into heat. In a heat pump, you're essentially taking refrigerant and you're running it in reverse from an AC. And you're trying to get heat from places that are generating heat, like electrical components, electronics, and using refrigerant, using a little compressor, spinning a little bit of power to get it a little bit hotter, and then providing that power as heat to the drivers. So that was really the biggest aspect of it. And then now, 10 years later, we've had 3 different versions of heat pumps come on the market, and it's all about improving the efficiency even more.
While EVs and frankly both gas and diesel engines are not immune to the effects of cold weather, it's important to note that as sustainability evolves, more and more features will be added to EVs that'll make that early morning winter commute just another boring drive. For more coverage of EVs, batteries, and sustainability, be sure to subscribe to SAE International.